We now move into a keynote session. I warmly invite the chairperson, Dr. Balachandran K, Senior Consultant Physician, Trivandrum, and Dr. Ashwin David Ashok, Diabetologist, Jyoti's Diabetes and Research Center, Artinger, to kindly take over the session.
Interesting keynote lecture here. The laboratory analysis in the diagnosis and management of diabetes mellitus by Dr. Anita Nambiar. She is a senior consultant physician from BPS Lakeshore Hospital, Kochi. Questions are given there. What are the recommendations for the laboratory analysis for the screening, diagnosis and monitoring of diabetes and its complications? Let's hear Dr. Anita Nambiar.
Oh, you have given me 20 minutes. I need only 15 minutes. Thank you. So I can see they have put 20 minutes. So very good afternoon to all. Thank you once again to Dr. Jyoti for inviting me to this program, and respected chairperson, seniors in this profession and dear friends. After so much of talk on GLP, Mounjaro, and many other mind-blowing sessions, this is a very simple and a basic topic that was assigned to me. So the topic is laboratory analysis in the diagnosis and management of diabetic mellitus. I won't be talking anything about management, and I won't be talking anything about type 1 diabetes. It's more of a diagnosis, and secondly is monitoring, because monitoring is very important. So I also, my slides are not so good, so I want excuse for that also. So what are the diagnostic criteria for diagnosis of diabetes? So there are 4 major criteria. One is fasting plasma sugar. All blood test is done in venous plasma. That's very important. Fasting plasma glucose level of 126 milligram or above, and fasting is defined as no caloric intake for at least 8 hours. So that's the first criteria. Second criteria is 2-hour plasma glucose after OGTT of 200 or more is diagnostic, and we use 75 gram of anhydrous glucose. I will come to that. And third is random blood sugar of more than 200 or equivalent to 200 milligram per deciliter in a patient who is symptomatic, irrespective of meal intake any time of the day. And the fourth is HbA1c level of 6.5 or more, done in a very good lab. So coming to one by one, I think fasting plasma sugar is the first one. Second, I will go into details. This is OGTT. The gold standard tool is OGTT. If you are given a choice, which is the best one, fasting or HbA1c or OGTT. So it should be known that OGTT is the gold standard tool, where we give 75 gram of oral glucose in standard, means dissolved in 70 in fluid water, and it has to be ingested, and we take a sample at the end of 0 hour and 2 hour. So this is approved by all bodies, means ADA, EASD, and the WHO criteria for interpreting to our OGTT is as follows. So 0 hour and second hour is must to tell that it is diabetes. So what is impaired fasting glucose? Impaired fasting glucose is one when you have a level between 110 and 126, less than 110 and 126, and at the end of 2 hours of OGTT less than 140, that is impaired fasting glucose. And impaired glucose tolerance is one when your fasting is less than 126 and the 2 hour is between 140 and 200. And to make a diagnosis of diabetes, it is more, fasting is more than, or 0 hour is more than 126, and postprandial or 2 hour is 200. So what are the things we should learn from this? OGTT reveals postprandial glucose handling, which actually tells you the beta cell dysfunction, and it is more sensitive than the fasting and HbA1c in diagnosis. So many of the patients who are in pre-diabetic stage or gestational diabetes, they can be picked up from this, and I said it correlates well with the beta cell functional capacity, and it is not validated in pediatric group. What are the advantages? So this is a good test to know the intolerance, glucose intolerance before the fasting hyperglycemia, and it identifies people who are going to be type 2 diabetes in future. It can even tell you cardiovascular risk that they are going to have, and it is more diagnostic than A1C and fasting blood sugar. Now coming to the third one, HbA1c, which is the average of 3 months. And what is good about it, it is prognostic as well as diagnostic. So it predicts the risk complication in type 2 diabetes. The good point about it is we need not do a fasting. It is stable, it can be done any time of the day, and it measures the long-term glucose. And if you do a CGM with HbA1c, this is the best monitoring of blood sugar in a diabetic patient. So what are the red flags that we see in HbA1c? So any condition that will increase the life of RBC, or where the RBC turnover is quite less, in that case it will be falsely elevated. So what are those conditions where it is falsely elevated, and what are the conditions where it is falsely decreased? So I said the conditions: vitamin means iron deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency, asplenia, when we have hyperbilirubinemia, hypertriglyceridemia, and in some cases of hemoglobinopathies, everywhere it is falsely elevated. Aging is a process. With in 1 decade, you can have increase of HbA1c by 0.1%. And what are the areas where the RBC, HbA1c is reduced? One is gestational diabetes, that is pregnancy, and all cases where there is more turnover of hemoglobin, that is hemolytic anemia, blood transfusion, where then you have acute blood loss, and people with uremia, CID, and where few drugs like antiretroviral drugs and hemoglobinopathies and genetic factors. One thing one should keep in mind, that in presence of a homozygous variant of hemoglobin, you cannot do HbA1c in such patients. So the disadvantage is we don't find a quick, we do not know it, that does not reflect the short-term changes, and we do not know how much is the variability, and as I said, the RBC condition may affect it, and standardization is an issue. So it's very important that it should be done from a standardized institution or a lab, and cost burden of course is there. So what are the alternative glycemic markers? So we have two. One is, there are many, but fructosamine and glycated albumin, which reflects glycemia of 2-3 weeks and useful in setting of altered RBC turnover. And CGM is not diagnostics. So whatever I said right now, it is in a non-pregnant state. So it is different in a pregnancy. How do you define glucose or diagnose diabetes in pregnant stage or gestational diabetes? So there are few more things which I wanted to know. Sometimes you are confused whether the patient is diabetic or not. So what do you do? So in such cases, two abnormal results from the same or from different tests is taken. For example, fasting or 2-hour PG can be taken, fasting or HbA1c. So the combination of the two, irrespective of that, if you feel that one is abnormal, what you are going to do? Again, what you can do is, you have to wait and then reevaluate the patient after 3 to 6 months. And now screening and diagnosis of GDM, there are 3 ways we do it: 1-step method, 2-step method, and the one followed by all of us, that are DIPSI guidelines. I think they have reduced my time, so I have to be fast. So one step is perform a 75 OGTT, and we in a fasting state, and it's done at the end of 24 to 28 weeks, and diagnosis is made by fasting of 92 or more, 1 hour 180 milligram per deciliter, and 2 hour 153 or more. At least one of the tests should be positive. Step 2, in first stage, we give a glucose loading of 50 gram, and if it is between 130 to 140, we do go for the second test, and we give 100 grams of glucose and 3-hour values 0, 1, 2, 3. I think it is written at the end of 3 hours, and at least 2 tests should be positive, and according to American College, even 1 is good. And the third is Dipsy, Dr. Pavadari is sitting here, irrespective of food that you had. It is 75 of anhydrous glucose is given, and at the end of 2 hours your sugar is taken. If it's more than 140, we define it as gestational diabetes. Now there are situations when we do not know whether it is type 1 diabetic or type 2. None of the guidelines says that you have to do a genetic marking in any of the diabetic patient. It's not done. So what you do when you have some confusion, like when you have LADA or when you have Modi, not our Modi Prime Minister, but maturity onset of diabetes in the young. So we have few things. One is a C-peptide level, which is low or undetectable in type 1, LADA. Where it is initial, it is normal, then declines. The third one is type 2 diabetes, where it's normal. In Modi also it's normal. Autoantibodies, multiple autoantibodies will be present in type 1 diabetes, positive in LADA, in type 2 is negative, and Modi it is negative. Age of onset less than 34, type 1, LADA is more than 30, type 2 diabetes, it is negative, it is 30 years, and Modi usually seen before 25 years. Insulin requirement, it is required in type 1 definitely, LADA it may or may not be, type 2 may or may not be, Modi we do not usually use. Family history pattern, often sporadic in type 1, may or may not be there in LADA. We have some family history, strong family history in type 2, and definite autosomal dominant 3-generation pattern. So the first part of my talk was on the diagnosis in non-pregnant state and pregnant state. Now coming to the monitoring aspect. So there are few things which I'll go through with fast. The first is self-monitoring of blood sugar, which is now called blood glucose monitoring. It's the most common home-based glucose monitoring, provides point-in-time glucose reading, and that's what we do. Advantage we can monitor it at home, especially used in patients who are on insulin, sulfonylurea, where we find the glycemic variability is high. It detects acute hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, portable, affordable, and you do something for yourself that is proactive, so that's very good. And second, I told that HbA1c, which is a long-term glycemic markers. I think I have gone through it. So what are the conditions when we cannot do HbA1c? So for example, the patient is pregnant, or they have a homogeneous variant hemoglobin. What do? We have to see something else. So in that case, we do glycated fructosamine or glycated albumin, which can be highly correlated with each other, and it is associated with long-term complication. And we definitely have lesser data compared to HbA1c. And when there is confusion, we do it. Now the talk of the day is CGM, continuous glucose monitoring. So what is CGM? It's a minimally invasive technique measuring glucose level in the interstitial fluid using a subcutaneous sensor. So it records every 1 to 5 minutes the glucose levels for 7 to 14 days. That's what we use, and we can categorize it in two: one by function and by usage. By function, we have a real-time RT-CGM, which is just a continuous reading, and it gives alarm of hypo and hyper. Secondly, it's an intermittently scanned CGM, where CGM is there, but you have to see in between with the recorder or what to by doing even self-monitoring of blood sugar. And so there are few metrics associated with CGM. Okay, so it's a valuable for individuals who are at risk of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. There is one term called time in range. The time in range is between 70 to 180. The patient is very well controlled. So I'm talking of the monitoring. The HbA1c will be around for 7 HbA1c. So the target should be between 70 to 140. And the other metrics are time above range or time below range. And time below range is between 54 to 70, and above is more than 180. So in pregnant female it is different, in normal person is different. So it should be 70, at least 70% of the time, that is 16 hours of the day. If your sugar is between 70 to 180, you are well controlled. And this I have already told that time range is the percentage of the time glucose level stay within the target range. Now, what are the significance of TIR? It is, we can know, associated with lower HbA1c and reduced risk. TIR complements HbA1c and helps assess treatment efficacy and increases TIR and minimizes TMR. Now, advantage as said, the beautiful part of CGM is it detects glycemic variability, postprandial spikes, dawn phenomena and stomach effect, identifies asymptomatic and nocturnal hypoglycemia, aids understanding the impact of lifestyle, enhances insulin therapy, support medication. There are many disadvantages. So we know there are so many comorbidities associated with diabetes. It's not, there are many things to say, but two more things that has to be included when you monitor a diabetic patient is we have to do urine albumin creatinine ratio in each and every patient that we see, maybe 15 seconds more. So that is mandatory, and eGFR has to be seen. That's very, very important. That has to be done for each and every patient, which we usually do not do. And second is FIB score. As our previous speaker said, it's very important. Dr. Vimal has said that out of the 10 patients who had a liver cirrhosis, 6 were diabetic. So we need to do a FIB score in all the patients. It's very easy. The age into AST divided by platelets into square root of ALT. If it's more than 1.3, less than 1.3, it has got a negative predictive value that they will, then you can repeat it after 2 years. But if it's positive, better you send the patient to a hepatologist or gastroenterologist. So that was the last slide. I invite all of you for the for the National Conference of RSSDI, which is going to be held in Kochi from 6th to 9th of November. Please come, and abstracts will be accepted till 15th of this month. We have Dr. Jyoti Dev is the organizing chairman, and I'm the organizing secretary. Forms are available at the counter. Please come and join that mega event. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. I think we will take the questions after Dr. Chandani speaks.
Yes, sir. I think that is a very great masterclass from you. You have covered the entire gamut of diagnostic investigations, basic diagnostic investigations in diabetes.
Sir, it is
fasting.
That's
Fasting glucose, postprandial glucose, HbA1c, fructosamine, glycate albumin, the albumin creatinine ratio, the CGM, and not to mention, you also mentioned genetic testing, C-peptide, GAD antibodies. I don't think there's anything that she has left out. And I hardly think there will be any questions from the audience. If there are any questions, we can take it.